Okay, everyone. So I'm thrilled to say we're joined by journalist and brilliant activist Jonathan Sacerdoti, who's joining us down the line. And I wanted to invite him on to talk about this story that, to be honest, I did not see coming, came out of nowhere. We don't know how much this is actually going to become actual potential policy of America, but I wanted to share it with you and get Jonathan's thoughts. The Telegraph and The Guardian and a few other media outlets now reporting that America is considering offering asylum for British Jews. Now, this was said by Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Robert Garson, who actually comes from the UK. And he said that he's been in talks with the State Department about providing sanctuary for Jews fleeing anti-Semitism in the UK. Garson was born in Manchester, and he told the Telegraph that the UK is no longer a safe place for Jews. He said the Islamist attack on a Manchester synagogue, the widespread anti-Semitism evident in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel had led him to conclude British Jews should be offered refuge in the US. Now, just as a matter of interest, he said that it's certainly not an unattractive proposition from America's side. A highly educated community. I've spoken to people in the State Department, mentioned it in my role on the Holocaust Museum Board. It's a populace that speaks English natively. It's educated, doesn't have a high proportion of criminals. And he himself lives in Florida, very close to Trump. And he said, when I look at what's going on with Jews in Britain, when I look at the changing demographics, I don't believe, and I've discussed this with people in the Trump administration, there's a future for them there. And for me, this is particularly sad. So first of all, just to pause for a second and think, it is quite sobering to think, what we've seen happening across the West, to be honest, not just in the UK over the last few years. But before we touch on the details, first of all, Jonathan, what's your initial reaction to this story?
It's not a new idea as far as I'm concerned. I know that Steve Witkoff's son actually mooted a similar idea a few months
Oh.
back. And I even know someone actually myself here in the UK who wrote directly to Donald Trump as a British Jew requesting asylum for them and their family on exactly these grounds some months ago as well. So it's not new. It's also supremely logical. So I think while some people attempted to treat it like a quirky news story,
Mm.
in this era of insanity and of Trumpian politics, it really isn't that strange an idea. And let me just say, there are plenty of British Jews. In fact, I don't know any British Jews who haven't had the conversation, at least, of maybe it's time to leave. Where would we go? When will we know if it's time, etc. Those things have got more and more urgent. And not everybody is, let's say, ready or able or willing, say, to move to Israel, which is the obvious refuge for Jewish people who are afraid for their existence or their continuity in their home country. Not everyone feels they can manage the language or master the culture or the climate or whatever it might be, or they may not be able to move their business as easily or work as easily in Israel as they might say in the UK. So it is logical that America, land of the free, the world's greatest superpower, just about still, might be a very attractive option. They speak English, more or less, in America, and that means that people will have at least not have to deal with the language barrier. And of course, America is so many different things. It's such a massive country that there are so many options from location to climate to time zone to culture, rural, urban. There's so much to choose from that it would be a very attractive prospect. And let's just say, think back to our parents or grandparents or great grandparents in some cases. If they'd had that opportunity as Jews living in Europe, how many of them could have been saved from the terrible fate that befell so many of our ancestors? Many of them did indeed try to flee to the United States and were unable to get papers or visas. There are so many stories like that that one reads all the time, often these days in obituaries. So this is really, I think, a supremely good idea. And I also know Robert Garson relatively well. I've been in touch with him today to discuss this this news story, and I know that he's a serious person. He himself moved to the States from here, from the UK, some years ago, and I think he recognises the ability to transition between the two and the importance for the Anglo-Jewish community of safety and security. The only thing to say is, who knows how long it will continue to be safe for Jews in America. There
Well,
is
indeed.
there, for example, far more of a resurgence of right-wing anti-Semitism, which is perhaps also terrifying for Jewish people. And yet, in the immediate short term, medium term, it may seem like a better option. So I do think personally that all Jewish people should be considering their options. And if they had this option, wouldn't it just be a great one that would help a lot of people who didn't feel that the other choices were really quite right for them?
Yeah, and also even like Mamdani, like, being the mayor of New York and all that kind of stuff. It's happening from all different angles. And that was indeed going to be one of my next follow ups. It's just like, well, how different is it to the current situation in America? And I assume you'd probably say, and I've been in agreement with you, that it is probably a different situation in Europe and in the UK. And just for those who aren't, a lot of our audience are outside of the UK. In fact, the vast majority are in America. Can you just give us a picture of the situation for Jews in the UK? How bad would you say it is?
Well, this is one of those questions that I get asked a lot. And it's important to say that, to be very upfront about this. Day to day life, I can say for me personally, is very pleasant. I think that the UK, Great Britain, is a really wonderful place to live in principle. And on a day to day basis, I very much enjoy my life. I like my neighborhood. I like the weather, bizarrely enough. I like the opportunities here. I like the theatre and culture and museums and galleries. I like all of those sorts of things, the parks. There's many wonderful things about Great Britain that I enjoy daily or weekly or monthly. It's more to do with a feeling, a sort of perception that we have of our future here. And that is partly because we do feel increasingly directly, many of us, threats to our existence as Jews. And more people have had experiences of anti Semitism, whether it's verbal or worse, violent. And those are becoming more frequent, much higher in number. If they haven't happened necessarily to someone in particular, they usually know someone that has suffered or they've heard of it through their community. And more importantly than that is the response then, first of the immediate society around them, and then of the authorities, starting with the police, then going up to, say, the Crown Prosecution Service, and then up to politicians. And each of those, I think, over recent years, though for quite some years, in my opinion, has been failing massively. We also have the problem of rising anti Semitism in our schools and our universities. We have the problem of a national broadcaster, the BBC, still enormously trusted by many people, though many fewer than in the past. And it spreads constant and vicious, in my opinion, lies, untruths, distortions about not just the Jewish state of Israel, but also Jews. I mean, there was a story a few years ago about a busload of Jewish school children who'd gone to celebrate Hanukkah in Oxford Street in London. They'd been attacked by a mob of Muslim men and had fled, and the BBC chose to report that story as one where the children had uttered anti-Muslim slurs against their attackers, something they had to eventually admit there was no evidence for, but only after the Jewish community really fought tooth and nail, had to pay for expensive audio analysis of weird bits of recordings the BBC claimed had these slurs in them. So things like that, I think, are actually really important. And then you look more recently to this Aston Villa football match controversy where Aston Villa were meant to be playing in Birmingham. Maccabi Tel Aviv were meant to be playing Aston Villa in Birmingham, and there's just been this whole long, prolonged, ridiculous set of lies about why first the Maccabi fans were banned, the Israelis, and then basically Jews were banned from attending, and the police dragged their feet when they were being investigated by parliamentary committee. And in the end, it just came out that, not only had they not provided all the information, to put it mildly, they had actually really bowed in the face of threats of violence from Muslims in that area who were going to carry out violence, they said, against the Jews if they attended. And so the police had decided simply to make sure that Jews couldn't attend. Now, things like that shock people to the core. Even if you're not a football fan, you recognize that that's exactly what's happening all over the place, whether it's the football example or
Why do the
whether it's
police
those
do that?
marches. Why did they do it? I suppose because they're afraid. They're afraid of the violence that could erupt in an area where
Right.
there is a violent minority group which feels, perhaps rightly now, that it has control, that it has power over others. If it threatens violence, it can call the shots. So if you want Jews not to be able to attend, or you want Israelis not to be able to attend, and you threaten violence, obviously any normal person or normal country would decide that the police should deal with the threat of violence. But a police that's cowed or a police that's weak or corrupted will instead perhaps behave as West Midlands police did and say, no, we'll cancel the Jews from coming. Then we'll lie about why we did it. We'll say that there was a threat of violence from the people who had been threatened, in fact. And those sorts of twisting and turnings of logic are what make Jews realize and recognize what's happened so many times through our history, which is our society around us doesn't need to overtly change its laws to discriminate against us. When the people who are really responsible for protecting those laws, protecting us, defending us, don't actually follow the law, don't follow ethics, morals, and common sense in dealing with the threat, they deal instead with the victim and restrict their rights, then I think people start to think it might be time to leave. So when it comes back to this issue of where Jews would go, I've been saying for quite some time that it's irresponsible for Jewish leadership organizations or representative organizations not to be trying to help Jewish people explore their options of how to get out, where to go, and to try to do so in an orderly way. That doesn't mean I think they should give up. Doesn't mean I think they should stop doing the work they like to do, which is to try to represent Jews and our needs and try to make life better. But if that's not working, and I think it isn't working, many people can say it's got worse, then I think they have a responsibility also to help provide alternatives. So my hope would be that Jewish representative bodies, let's say like the Board of Deputies of British Jews, could actually get behind an idea like this and speak just non-hysterically, very calmly with the US authorities, whether it's directly with the president or whether it is with the US embassy here, to try to see if we can work out actually a possible route for Jewish people, Jewish Britons, to seek the right to live and work in America, to even become Americans, as I think it would be enormously beneficial, not just for those who are trying to seek to flee persecution, but also to the United States. It's worth saying that if you are accepting immigrant communities, Jewish immigrants from the UK will be among the best you could possibly hope for, mostly highly educated, largely quite successful people, hard workers. Obviously, their culture, ethics, very similar to those which are part of the foundation of the United States. And so I think it would be a very beneficial action, very beneficial idea both ways. Both peoples would benefit enormously. It would have the added bonus, perhaps, for a president like President Trump, of sticking his two fingers up at Keir Starmer and saying, if you can't look after the Jews in your country, I can. But I don't think it's primarily about that. I think it should primarily be about helping a group of people, many of whom really do feel that their options are limited and not great, and this could open up some new possibilities for them.
And I also think about these concerns around the police and the way they deal with intimidating behavior from Islamic extremists, etc. The hate marches that we saw against Israel. I'm sure it will, and I'm sure it doesn't just concern British Jews, but any Brits of good sense, because if that's the way the police choose to deal with extremism and have this kind of two-tiered policing as it's been described, should concern all people. My next question would be around. I was actually thinking as you were saying this, is it in some ways, could it counterintuitively help British Jews to maybe fight even harder in the UK if they have this kind of backup option? In some ways, does making this American policy, could it some ways embolden British Jews to try and fight for the UK with confidence before things come crashing down?
I do think that many people haven't decided it's time to leave. They've thought very closely about how it might be time to leave soon, and might and soon are the qualifiers there. Some people have left, by the way. Many people have left this country, Jewish and non-Jewish, because they just don't see a bright future. And also, there's a desire to avoid the rush, let's say. So if you wait until the very last minute when you really know you must leave somewhere, that's when you leave a burning building and you decide which three items you can grab on the way out. Whereas if you plan ahead a bit, that's why I think a responsible Jewish leadership would be helping people to plan ahead. not telling people they have to get out. It's not telling people that it's so urgent they have to do it now. It's just saying we'll help you explore your options. I mean, it's like people who are helping, who are already preparing their Aliyah files. They're already getting the paperwork together. Some maybe haven't decided that they're definitely going to do it or when they're going to do it. And there are many reasons people choose to emigrate. Any peoples from any countries to any other countries. Sometimes they're negative, sometimes they're positive, sometimes there's opportunity, sometimes they're fleeing something. I suspect that in this case, it would be a mixture of some of those things. And depending on where people are going to, the opportunities differ. And the possibility of a better life for whatever reason in another place differs as well. So I do think that if people are able to make some plans or to even explore some plans, knowing that there's that possibility, you're right. They will then perhaps feel more comfortable staying in place if they don't really want to leave, if this is something they're doing because they feel they have no other hope. Well, yes, knowing you have it in place, knowing you've made the preparations, or even just knowing what the process would need to be legally might help you then stay put and say, okay, now I feel more comfortable that I have an option, but I'm going to stay and try and make things better. I do think a lot of people are doing that. I'm still here, even though I do think about this very, very carefully and closely, very, very often. And indeed, people, like, ask me to talk about it. And I think we all talk about it. I would imagine you and your family have probably talked about where you'll go and when you'll go. And a lot of that might be because of positives about the place that you would go to, but a lot of that might be about negatives about the place you're leaving. And I'll just say finally that the people that perhaps might come out of all this the worst are not necessarily even the Jews in terms of migration. They might be the non-Jews. Jews, thank God, these days have the option of Israel to go to if they really need that place to seek a safe haven. That's one of the reasons why Israel has that law of return for all Jewish people around the world. But there are many British people who don't have any options. They don't have second
Yeah.
citizenship, second passports. They may not be able to go anywhere. They don't feel they can go to Israel because they're not Jewish, so they won't have the right of return. Those people, I think, appreciate greatly that Jews and others, all Britons, are able to fight for our future here. I do hope that none of this would be necessary, but the way things are going, I personally think this is an extremely good option. And if Robert Garson and others, I think Rabbi Pinney Dunner also talked about it some months back in an article that he wrote. He's another Brit who lives in America now. These are people who've made that transition themselves. So I think that if they're able to use their influence with President Trump and to appeal to his good sense and his desire to help communities like British Jews to flee when their freedoms and protections are not how they should be, to seek a better life somewhere. I think that would be absolutely great if they could put this into policy. I can't see any negatives about the possibility being opened up, only positives. The pressure it would put on the UK government would be enormous because there should be a great deal of embarrassment that people would want this and take advantage of it. So
Mm.
it could help to improve things in the UK. And as you say, it could help people stay here a bit longer to try to make things better as well. I think it would focus a lot of minds, but above all else, it would be on face value just a brilliant possibility, a brilliant option people would have to keep in reserve if they want it.
Yeah, yeah, and I do have, as I'm sure as you say, every British Jewish family have these conversations. To be honest, I think if possible, if people are able to, and it's definitely something I believe, Jews should, if they're able to move to Israel and make that work, I think that should be definitely be highly encouraged as a top priority. For some people, it can't always work for all kinds of reasons, and as you say, for all the reasons you listed, with still all those caveats around, there's all kinds of question marks. And I actually have strong reservations about the way in which America is heading, just as we do with the UK. But having more options available, I think, is always a welcome thing. Also, completely agree with you that it would be such a loss to Britain for the Jewish community not to be there. And that really kind of leads to the final question I want to ask, which is around fighting. Do you still, and I think you've kind of alluded to the fact that you do still believe in fighting as well as providing for other options. But just if you could just circle back on that point, and also, what do you think is what does a point of no return scenario for Britain look like to you?
Well, I think every one of us has our own measure of that. And I don't want to be prescriptive for anyone. So I'm not telling people they should leave. I'm also not telling people they should go to Israel or shouldn't. Each of us has to make our own decisions for our own lives and our own appetite for risk and our own evaluation of the current circumstances. I just believe that more and more people are evaluating the risk as higher and evaluating their options. And so it just makes sense to try to help people to have more options that might be helpful. And we know that from our history. And we also just know that from common sense. So the point of no return, I don't know, there are so many possibilities. I mean, there's talk even among some on the right, in particular in the UK, of things like banning kosher slaughter, mostly because I think it's a veiled attempt to try and ban halal meat in an effort to try to subdue Islamic extremism, though that might in fact be a problem for all Muslims, not just extremists. I think there is a reluctance to protect Jews properly. I mean, we've already seen that now. Jews have been killed in a terror attack on Yom Kippur in Manchester. That could be a turning point for some people. I think there are so many. I mean, the election of this Labour government was a turning point for some people who left pretty quickly afterwards. After, remember, the Labour Party, just under its previous leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was found by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, I think they're called, to have been institutionally anti-Semitic. Well, some people believed that Keir Starmer was going to deal with that and root it out of the party, even though he sat alongside Jeremy Corbyn all those years telling us to vote for him in his shadow cabinet. And he would have been happy to see Jeremy Corbyn as prime minister, according to what he said all those years through. So I think many people were skeptical, and I think that's been proven to be reasonable in the last year or so that they've been in power. So generally speaking, I think lots of people's point of no return has already come. Some people have realised it, some people haven't. Some people's point of no return is coming. And the last thing worth saying as well, perhaps controversially, when I've been in the States recently, particularly meeting Jews, I mean, I remember meeting a lot of Jewish families who had left New York for Florida. Many did that during the COVID pandemic era, just because it made sense for them. But others have left since. Now, even more, I think, are leaving because of the election of Zoran Mamdani as the mayor there. And a lot of those Jews actually now say they are very pleased to live in a state where they're allowed to own guns, which is quite alarming to hear. But again, when you've seen people killed at a synagogue in the UK, you do perhaps think, would it have been different if any of the security or the community had had a license to carry a gun, had been able to defend the synagogue in that way quicker? Now, gun ownership is a whole other debate and discussion.
Yeah.
But I do know that a lot of Jews who moved into states where they could own and carry guns have done so after October the 7th. Imagine if you'd been able to fight back on October the 7th when a marauding mob of Palestinian Islamic terrorists had invaded your home. So I don't think things that once seemed fantastical horror stories now seem quite as impossible in people's minds. And in an era when we've seen people drive through the streets of London with Palestinian flags plastered over their cars, shouting through megaphones, F the Jews, rape their daughters, rape their mothers. And then not that long afterwards, we saw people with the same flag, Palestinian flag, burst over the border in Israel, where they proceeded to F the Jews, rape their daughters, rape their mothers, and far worse, sadly, killing and kidnapping. You can understand why Jews elsewhere in the world, especially somewhere where that threat was made, might feel they need defense. If they don't feel they get the defense from the police and they don't feel they get the defense from the state, they might want to go to another state where they do get that defense. And even in that state, in the United States, where they might be able to own their own guns and act with them responsibly, they may feel more protected themselves. So I think, unfortunately, we live in a very scary world for Jewish people and non-Jewish people. And I commend Robert Garson for bringing this to the spotlight, putting this in the spotlight. And I hope that this is a policy that will be considered very seriously. And that if it becomes policy, that many Jews will explore to see if it's right for them.
Yeah, I suppose the reason I ask about is there a point in their return, and what I'm really asking as well is, what the point of return is. What I'm really asking is, do you think Britain can turn it around?
Well, listen, here's the thing. Lots of Jews in the Holocaust era maybe thought they hadn't reached the point of no return until it was too late and they couldn't escape. I often read obituaries in the Times, and sometimes there's one about a Holocaust survivor, and the stories are always so similar in some respects. You know, their family didn't get out in time, or some members of the family. So I think trying to measure when the point of no return is perhaps a bit futile. None of us wants to leave on the last plane. That's not the plan. We all want to plan our lives carefully and sensibly to try and live lives of freedom, safety, and security without the fear that we need to measure when the point of no return is. As I said, I can't tell you if we've reached a point of no turning back here in the UK, Jews or non-Jews. Many people think we have. And many of the people, though, who think it could be turned around are opting for choices which for me are also quite alarming and scary, or very unknown, very uncertain, politically and in other areas. And that is also alarming, often for Jewish people. My friend Einat Wilf said, when I spoke with her about this in an interview, she said Jews suffer from a timing problem. We're often one of the earliest victims. And so even if Britain hasn't reached a point of no return and is able to turn things around, it would be foolish for Jews not to think about whether they will survive that transition to turning it around. If the transition itself is bad for us, or if it just comes too late to help with things like the shooting that happened in Manchester, so rather the stabbing and the ramming in Manchester, and also the things like the shooting we saw in Bondi Beach in Sydney. I think there's an awful lot to be alarmed about and an awful lot to plan around.
Jonathan, as ever, we're going to try and stay optimistic and do what we can. But thank you so much for your insights and thoughts. Really appreciated. Just hang on for a moment. After covering Israel for years, I've realised that most of the lies boil down to one simple tactic used by Israel's enemies from the very start: the deliberate reversal of cause and effect. And our new documentary exposes exactly how this works. Have a watch of our trailer for our new film called The Great Reversal, and you can watch it in full right now by clicking the link below in the video description. For decades, one idea has shaped how much of the world understands the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel did something wrong, and the Palestinians simply resisted. Whether it's 1948 or the recent war in Gaza, the story is the same every time. Israel provokes, Palestinians resist. Israel oppresses, Palestinians fight back. This narrative dominates campuses, the media, and much of global politics. It feels familiar, it feels intuitive, and for many people, it feels true. But what if the sequence is backwards? What if the origin point and every major chapter that followed has been told in reverse? In the wars of 1948 and 67, in the collapse of Oslo, in the suicide bombings of the Intifada, in the rockets after Israel withdrew from Gaza, in the massacre of October 7th, and the global narrative that followed. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to expose the great lie that has reversed cause and effect, a narrative engineered to help the real aggressors erode Israel's legitimacy. We'll trace the conflict from its origins to the present day, revealing how at every stage the true sequence of events was inverted, how aggression was reframed as resistance, how defense was recast as provocation, and how a conflict rooted in hatred of Jews was deliberately twisted into a story that blames the Jews. Join us as we restore the story to the order in which it actually happened and uncover the truth hidden beneath a century of lies. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.